everybody. Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk, our version of a podcast where you walk if you want to while we do the talking. Yes, we don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue. So if you're up for it, plug in your earphones and listen while you take us for a walk. So I'm Sarah, one of the co-founders and coaches at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I'll be hosting today's Walk the Talk, the next in our series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders, and anyone interested in the mental health and well-being of people in the workplace. And I'm delighted today to be chatting to Adam Jones, CEO of Then Media, who have recently launched a remote-first online community. And a little bit about Adam. So Adam is a passionate remote-first advocate who's launched several successful businesses around how technology can create meaningful and positive connections, specifically within the events industry. And in Adam's words, none of these businesses would have been possible or successful without a remote-first approach. So Adam is extremely well placed to talk to us today about the subject of how to remote work well. And it's a pleasure to be chatting to Adam as we have previously worked together in the world of events. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's great to get into this conversation. But before we do so, a bit of scene setting, if I may. So the pandemic has presented organisations and individuals with an opportunity to rethink and reimagine how we have always done things, including how we work and how we collaborate in the most effective way for our people and our organisations. So hence today's conversation about how to remote work well. And this conversation is timely given last week's news from Deloitte when their CEO announced that they won't make it compulsory for employees to work for a set number of days from the office or specific locations. So kind of defining a new type of flexible working, if you like. Now, this is not necessarily the right approach for all businesses. I do want to just say that up front. Of course, this decision will be dependent on the culture, on the organisation and on the industry and what's right for it. But we feel it's an important conversation to be having and to understand how mental health and well-being sits at the heart of the discussion. So on to today's conversation. Firstly, Adam, can you explain what is remote first working?
So remote first, actually, funny enough, it's two things. It's our brand name. We chose that brand name because we believe in what it stands for. It's also a specific terminology for an organizational strategy where first and foremost, it's about employee flexibility. So it's not anti-office. You build an office into the strategy, but the office has a slightly different purpose. But it gives employees the flexibility to work from home or work from the office if they want to. But it's that choice that's so important. And it means that you can build an office around collaboration, communication, brand engagement, rather than a place to primarily work. And it's an approach that I believe in. And it's the reason why we set up the community, because one of the things you did in the intro, one of the things you said in the intro was about me not being able to have started those businesses without it. And I truly believe that I wouldn't have been able to. I'm not an entrepreneur that was backed by rich parents. I had to use every pound very wisely, and not having to spend it on an office in the early days was very important. And finally, when I did build a business up to a point where I could afford an office, the office wasn't where people worked from primarily. It was where we collaborated on ideas. It was where we invited customers to meet the team. So I truly believe those businesses were successful because they had that foundation built on remote first. And to be honest, at the time, it wasn't even a defined strategy. It was just what we did to survive. So, yeah.
Interesting. Well, I love that, particularly what you sort of said there about it. It's sort of not anti-office. It's kind of rethinking how the office space is used and being perhaps a bit more intentional with it. So a place to interact, to collaborate, to learn. Okay, so what are the challenges, perceived or otherwise, and the opportunities with remote first working?
So I'll tackle the stigma first, because there is a stigma associated with home working specifically, and I experienced this in the first business. We used to hide the fact that we were working remotely. We would have telephone numbers that were all kind of patched to look like they were an office space. We would transfer calls between each other, but we'd do everything in our powers to, on the front end in the shop window, make it appear that we were working in an office, because as soon as people believed that we weren't, it almost undermined our business. So there was a stigma on that front. So as a business leader, we tried to hide it. I don't think we need to hide it anymore. I think the realization that you can be a very, very efficient business in a remote first environment, as shown by the decisions made by Deloitte, as you mentioned, and Google and Microsoft. The other challenge is really, I find, a kind of how you nurture your younger staff, and this is always a concern for me, and this is where I think the office comes into play. I see the office purpose changing from being a place of work to more of a university campus, where new staff can be tutored, understand the job, understand the business, understand the customer, understand the vision and what the business stands for, giving them that launch pad to then be successful, to make that choice on whether to work from home or whether to work from the office. The other challenges I hear quite a lot are, how do you measure performance? If you can't see someone working, how do you know they're working? And that's an easy one for me. You measure different roles with different methods, but a sales role, for example, is a very easy role to measure performance. And I've seen sales performance reduce in a working from home environment. A lot of salespeople need that buzz around them and that excitement, that competitive streak to it. But that's not for every salesperson. Some salespeople like to be methodical, they like quiet. And again, it comes back to that choice. If you want that buzz, go to the office, collaborate with team members in a sales environment. But I see a lot of sales managers jump to the conclusion that it's remote working that is what makes that and creates that negative impact. Actually, it may not be. It may be the systems and processes. Yes, you're working from home, therefore you need to tweak the business model. You might need to tweak the software that you're using, the reporting that you're using to reintroduce that competitive nature, league tables, almost turn it into a game environment where you're competing against your colleagues virtually. So I think what I would say from a sales perspective, yes, you might get an initial drop, but you can combat it through other ways than forcing people back into the office and creating that challenge. And then the other element is people misinterpreting remote first working with lockdown working. Yes. I think everybody suffered during lockdown. I had the kind of pleasure of working remote first before kind of everybody started doing it as a consequence to COVID, and I knew the benefits that were there. I could work from a coffee shop one day, I could work from Spain the other day, and had the freedom to work wherever I want, and that flexibility was really important, especially kind of trying to work around family and friends. And I think that's the other misconception, is what we're experiencing right now is not remote working. It really isn't. It's the cause of the pandemic. So those are kind of the challenges, I think.
And what about the opportunities?
Opportunities are huge. I think the savings that you can make by not having so many offices, such a big office space, can be put into more exciting areas of the business. Tutoring, working from creating better environments at home for your staff so they're more comfortable. I think one thing I'm seeing with a lot of bigger businesses, they're actually reducing the amount they spend on car allowances and spending it more on home office upgrades to make that working environment more effective. I also see from my team as well, they have been more effective in a remote first strategy. The output has been huge. And again, kind of coming back to my earlier point about how you measure different teams, my development team work on points, on a point basis, and we can monitor their effectiveness in that way. It's output, where the output has increased rather than the attendance. And I think there's the worst way to measure performance and success is by attendance. I think that's the other thing is
well, we talked about that before, didn't we? Sort of presenteeism does not equate to
just turn up. That's not good enough. So I think the opportunities are huge as long as you measure the right things. I think if you measure the wrong things, you'll never realize the true potential of a remote first strategy. But if you fully understand what you should be measuring, which is the output and performance, and you can do that in lots of different ways for lots of different roles, then the opportunities are huge. So cost saving, increased output, and also staff well-being. I think we're just scratching the surface on the powers of employees collaborating together. Google's initial strategy was to force people back to the office. They quickly changed their mind when a large group of their employees turned around to say, no, we don't want to come back to the office. Google were a very smart company. They changed their strategy very quickly and built a strategy for it. But my fear is that a lot of companies won't be agile enough to change their strategy and will continue to force employees back into the office. And with the increase of remote first companies, there's plenty of job opportunities in those businesses that I think some top talent will move around. So.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the key there from what you've said is listening to employees and listening to what they want and need at this point in time. But I guess there has to be a sweet spot, doesn't there, between listening to the individuals and then finding marrying what works best with the organization and its needs.
Absolutely. And then that's why we started the remote first community, because nobody's got it perfect. No one ever will get it perfect, because every business is slightly different. But the community was built to share knowledge, share experience, and learn faster. Find out what works from other businesses, what doesn't work, and trying to collaborate as a community will drive this forward much faster. I think we all know the benefits of remote first. It's just how we do it, and kind of being open-minded within the community, and also willing to share failure. I think I've never seen failure as failure. I see it as an opportunity to learn. If I kind of instill this in my team, if they're not failing, they're not pushing boundaries. So I think the same is kind of what we try and instill in our communities, to share bad experiences, because everybody can learn from those.
Absolutely. Okay, so digging into some of those kind of challenges and opportunities a little bit more. We've talked a bit there about productivity, and actually when we chatted before, you'd referenced and there have been a number of kind of studies to show that actually, and yes, we're talking about the lockdown kind of remote working, but productivity has been shown to be up compared to when we are in the office. And obviously, arguably, this is good for the organisation, but perhaps not so good for the employee. So, that potential for burnout is very much there if you aren't disciplined and don't have the kind of the good boundaries in place to separate sort of your home life and your work life, when you don't have the kind of the physical boundaries or the commute to put that in place. So, for example, we hear a lot of people are replacing their commute by working more. So how do we address that in a remote first world to ensure that people's well-being is balanced and maintained in a remote and hybrid working model?
It's a really, really good question, really good point as well. Working hours have increased. So a big VPN provider have seen that typical connection has gone from 9 hours per day pre-pandemic to 11 hours per day during the pandemic, and kind of the enforced work from home. And that's quite common across most countries, US, Canada, UK. It's the opposite in Scandinavian countries. They've actually gone from 9 hour average to about 7 or 8 hours. So theirs is actually reduced, which is interesting. But there are a lot of people that are working longer hours. And actually this was, on a personal level, something I really struggled with, was when to stop and how to stop. It's slightly different when it's your own business as well, because that adds that kind of extra layer of responsibility where it's your passion, it's your hobby almost. But that was something that I had to work very hard on, kind of creating those boundaries on what I did and what I didn't, and trying to introduce very small changes into my life. So not taking my phone to bed, because I got in the habit of sitting in bed for an hour sending emails, and then before I even woke up and said hello to my wife or good morning to my wife, I'd check my phone for emails. And I think this is a common problem that people have. So just a very simple thing that I do is just leave my phone downstairs when I go to bed, just to stop me doing it. But burnout is real, and I think there's a responsibility on leaders within businesses to set those boundaries, to be responsible in email. So when I send an email at 9 o'clock at night, I make sure that I put in that email, don't reply to me, I'm not expecting and don't want to reply until the morning, because I think most people are diligent people and they want to be seen to be working, and if they don't respond to that 9 o'clock email, then it will appear bad. But actually, you've got to instill in your business that actually that is bad. Don't reply to me. Just because I'm working at stupid o'clock doesn't mean I want you to work at stupid o'clock. We are working asynchronously almost, and that's even more poignant right now, because a lot of the benefits of remote first working are that you're not necessarily limited by a talent pool within a 10-mile radius. You can hire across the globe, which means different time zones. And obviously, as well as I do, working in an American business, you work from 7 o'clock in the morning, you get a little lull at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden the American business comes in and you start a new day almost in the same day. So you're working 2 days in one, and that's a challenge, and that's something that's going to grow even more challenging, because the US will rely on the UK hours, China will rely on the US hours. So you kind of have to manage that, and you have to adapt to be able to work asynchronously and set those expectations that, yes, I'm messaging someone in the US, I'm not expecting a response, and instilling that. But it's a bigger challenge. I often kind of, when you speak to someone about working from home, their initial thought is, oh yeah, you're watching Netflix or you're watching Jeremy Kyle. That's never been the case for me, and it's not the case for a lot of people I know. And it was a big fear from bosses and managers that working from home, people are just going to lay about in their slippers. But the complete opposite is the reality. Most people are burning out because they feel that responsibility to show that they're working.
They go out of their way to really like be more visible. Yeah,
completely. And that there are ways to overcome that. There really are. I know the Labour government are looking at ways to actually, through software, enforce it. That'll never work. Enforcing it through software, turning email off at a given time, will never work. It needs to be softer than that. It needs to be just instilled within your company, working patterns and expectations and leadership, really.
Yes, no, that's interesting. And that actually leads quite nicely onto this next sort of question. Another sort of perceived challenge with kind of this sort of hybrid working model is maintaining culture and collaboration. I think what you were talking there about is, leaders modeling behavior rather than kind of putting in sort of systems to create to enforce a behavior. It's more down to the modeling through the culture. And I know you have some sort of strong views on how you create culture and collaboration in a remote first world. So I'd love to hear a bit more on that.
Culture is not born out of working in the office or working from home. I often liken it to school days. Your friends that you made during school and the culture that you created within your year group at school wasn't done in the classroom. It was done at playtime, at lunchtime, after school, and these kind of extracurricular. That's where your memories were made. So it's about creating culture separately to kind of the working environment. It's also something that bad culture is in lots of companies, and my experience has been that nothing impacts negative culture more than a person. And I've also found the higher that person up the chain is, the worse it can be. It can be kind of toxic throughout a business, and it's more about the individuals, the people in the businesses that generate culture, that create the environment to create culture. And one thing that we're seeing a lot of is actually using the office to kind of do fun things that aren't work related, meetups in different places. So getting people once a year, twice a year out to kind of a nice environment, Barbados, for example, where people can actually spend some time together and learn who each other are.
Nice, wouldn't it?
It's very nice. I mean, you don't have to go that big. I mean, something very, very simple we do is we just occasionally play some games that get people to kind of share more vulnerable things about themselves, to share kind of their personal life. Very simple questions like, where were you born? Which then leads to a conversation, and people like to kind of share their past experiences, and I think that's the thing that creates culture, is understanding who you're working with. And that wasn't solved in an office. That's never been solved. We've worked in businesses where the culture was toxic and everything was office based, and that was more from a leadership perspective that generated that kind of culture of fear and micromanagement, and that's something that would probably be toxic in either a office-based environment or a work from home environment. So I do think you need to adapt a little bit. You need to intentionally kind of set things up to understand sort of who your team members are, get them collaborating, and getting them to do stuff that isn't work related. We played a game last week that was picking up something on your desk that has personal meaning to you and sharing it with the rest of the group, because it's that vulnerability that you show to someone else and everybody shows to you that creates that connection and creates a nice working environment. And just on that, the Venn Media, the business that is behind Remote First, and also a show that we run called London Dessert Festival. We hadn't met, half the team hadn't met each other when we founded that business.
Okay.
We were running for 8 months before some of us actually met each other. There's still a couple of people that haven't met face to face because they're in the US and the other part of the team is in the UK. And I would say that we have a very, very strong unit, strong team, and great culture. It just needs a small amount of effort and a bit of research, and again, kind of speaking to other people and understanding what works for them, and trying it is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, I love that use of the word sort of intentional. It is being much more intentional about how we use spaces. And I heard the other day someone describe kind of that on-site is going to become the new off-site.
Yeah. Yes.
New world. So that will be the sort of novelty of gathering in the office as opposed to all kind of gathering outside. Yeah.
And we'll probably know better than most, obviously being in the events industry, how important face-to-face is.
Yeah.
That kind of tangible, physical kind of connection with people where you're talking face-to-face, shaking hands, all these different things that we're not currently allowed to do, but they are things that make connections. So again, kind of the remote first strategy is not about working from home in isolation. It's about generating environments where people can meet. But that day-to-day commute, that day-to-day sat at your desk, churning through emails, doesn't have to be in the office. So why should it be? I've always felt uncomfortable driving for 45 minutes just to sit in front of a computer and not talk to anybody because I've got a 200 email churn to get through, and then going back home and leaving having spoken to 3 people in the day. It doesn't seem right. So
yeah, no, that's extremely interesting. And just to pick up something else that you said there about how important it is to get to know the people we work with kind of on a personal level. We talk about this in our training, because it was very much in start of my career, that you'd leave your personal life at the door and you come into work and it's kind of, you have 2 hats, and you keep the 2 very separate. But I think actually all the evidence now shows that how important it is to really understand people on a personal level. That's where real true connection and collaboration can happen.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability.
I completely agree. And it's a similar ilk to that British stiff upper lip that has got us into the situation where people don't talk about their feelings and their well-being. It's just something that was instilled in so many people that you never really showed your true self or emotion to a point that it actually caused a huge amount of damage that could have been solved early. So I've been in those businesses where, doesn't matter how bad your day is at home, when you come into office, you leave it behind you. And that's not conducive to a healthy well-being or a healthy culture. So if you've had a bad morning and you decide that I'm going to sit this one at home because I don't feel like I want to be around other people today.
Own it.
Yeah, this is yours to own. And that vulnerability is a real value to our business. And the more you do it, the more you understand your team and when they're effective, when they're not effective, and kind of working around the rest of the team. So it's very, very.
Yeah, there's that pressure, isn't there, when you're a leader to think you need to have all the answers and to know everything and to be that strong kind of figurehead. But actually, I think that's not the case. And actually, to be vulnerable is to know when you don't, and to admit when you don't know the answers, and to open it up to your team to go, look, is there someone else or what's your thoughts on this, and to have that conversation.
I'm a real believer in surrounding myself with more talented people than me, and I think if you can actually honestly say that, then you're probably a fairly good leader to start with. I've never worked effectively under micromanagement, and I don't think many people do. I definitely think kind of opening up and showing when you need help is a good thing for the business overall, and fundamentally, kind of as a business leader, you've got to make a business successful. Your ignorance and stubbornness shouldn't get in the way of that. So yeah, no.
Okay, so just one final kind of question on sort of perceived challenges presented by the sort of the remote working model. How do you ensure that there is kind of no advantage or disadvantage to one group of people over another in that kind of working model? So how do you ensure kind of access and equity in that environment so that sort of no FOMO?
FOMO is a really difficult thing. If you think all of your colleagues are in the office having fun and getting opportunities to go up the ladder in the business, then yeah, that's a worry. And there's a real concern around there. And again, it kind of comes from leadership and collaboration. I think a lot of this can be solved through software, making sure that you have the right technology tools to ensure that collaboration is easy, chatting is easy, and group meetings. So the combination of software, combination of just different things like these games, like I mean, for us, we use Slack, and we have a coffee break meeting room in our Slack channel where we just post these different things that we're doing in the day or something interesting, just to create that kind of opportunity to just have a conversation out the blue. It replaces that water cooler kind of style discussion that you have in the office. But it is a challenge, and I think it's different for every business, and you have to kind of understand what ticks and work a little bit harder to make sure that on-site and off-site are collaborating together and communicating when they need to. I see kind of the different age groups wanting different things from remote working. And I know kind of it's very difficult for new starters 18 to 25. A lot of them don't actually really want to work from home. They want to be in an office. They want to learn from others and kind of almost be nurtured in that business. But when you get kind of to family age and you're building your kind of your family through, you want to work from home because you want that flexibility to drop children off and pick them up and do all those kind of things. So it's very different from different age groups. It seems to be very structured to age groups. So if you look at the statistics, it's a lot of 30 to 50-year-olds just want to work from home, and then 20-year-olds want to work from an office.
Well, we saw that in some of the studies particularly from the first lockdown, that one of the groups to really struggle were the sort of the under 25s, probably for a number of reasons, not having kind of the comfort and the home setup that perhaps older colleagues would have. But also, I think to your point, they have different kind of aims and aspirations. They want to be out and about and a meeting and face to face a bit more, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think the other way to overcome this is just to make sure you have regular face to face check-ins, and even that doesn't have to be in the office. I see a lot of people making the mistake of just having meetings in the office, but again, it's not a conducive environment to create culture and collaboration and get rid of that fear of missing out. I think pulling people into the office needs to be intentional to get people to meet each other and trust each other. And also, it doesn't actually have to be in the office. One of the things that our community members that they talk about meetings, there are better environments for creativity. So walking around Central Park or sitting in the middle of Central Park having a design strategy meeting had a far greater output than sitting in an office environment where you had 2 hours to come up with the best idea ever.
We're big fans of taking kind of, like a problem, or, we need to come up with an idea, on a walk, like a walkie-talkie. If you can do that in person, then great, but otherwise on the phone, and and the ideas start to flow. Being out in nature, it's really helpful for creativity.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned systems, and obviously technology is very much at the heart of, and software is a big passion of yours, but Zoom fatigue or virtual fatigue is a thing of the last 18 months or so, probably for us not being intentional with its use. But how do businesses use technology to connect remote people in a more meaningful way?
Zoom's a blessing and a curse. I think without Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meets and all of the others that are out there, this would have been much harder, getting through the pandemic and having meetings. But I see people kind of mistakenly think that they have to enforce meetings all the time to create collaboration. Actually, that just gets in the way of productivity, in my view. And I think there are a lot of businesses that are cottoning on to this. So you have meeting free Friday, or you can only set Zoom meetings on Mondays, and kind of having that fixed time that means that people can be creative, they can do their work. But clogging people's days up with meetings for meeting's sake is not a good thing. And actually, to be honest, that happened in businesses before the pandemic. I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in where it could have been a 2-minute meeting, but ended up being stretched out to an hour. And
why is that? You have to feel like you have to fill that hour.
One of the things that I do, I tend to only put in half-hour meetings, and if it takes longer, then it takes longer. If it's shorter, great. And we do, because we're a development company as well. I run a development company. We have daily stand-ups, but they're so regimented and fast that most of the time they take no more than 6 minutes. And it's all about what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do today, and what my challenges are. And it's very structured, and it needs to be coordinated and orchestrated in a particular way. Again, kind of very intentional. But I think Zoom fatigue can be quickly solved by having someone that really runs that meeting properly, effectively, regardless of whether it's in Zoom or whether it's face-to-face. If you want an outcome, you have to be very clear on what that vision is and what the outcome should be, and you do everything in your power to get to that outcome. And so I probably shouldn't say this, so we're kind of not past the watershed, but we used to kind of have the bullshit monkey that if someone's just
we'll bleep that out on the recording.
Good stuff. But if someone's kind of just going off on a tangent, then they'll get a monkey thrown at them. But we don't do that anymore. That was kind of real old school stuff.
No idea, it's a bad idea, Adam.
I think people need to be a little bit more intentional and strategic with meetings. One, how many there are and whether you need it. You always have to question whether you actually need this meeting, or whether it can be solved by a Slack chat or something else, or whether the meeting just needs to be structured better and resolved quicker.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of strikes me as we've had this conversation that ultimately the sort of tenets of kind of good leadership and good culture and good organizations, whether you're in a remote or a hybrid world or not, the same are true across. We need to just be sort of more intentional. We need to communicate well. We need to trust our employees, but also trust our organization. It goes two ways, and listen, and learn and adapt. These principles, whether you're in the office or not, still ring true. So as we come to kind of wrap up, we've got 5 more minutes. If there are any questions, please do pop them in the chat. I have got one that's come through, so I will ask that of you in a moment. But Adam, what kind of sort of final advice would you give to kind of business leaders that are listening today, or HR professionals who are looking to embrace a kind of a hybrid approach or a remote first approach?
So I'd say first thing is actually have a very intentional strategy for your remote team. Make sure that you kind of go through what the benefit structure look like, and just remember that working from home isn't a benefit. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about how you make their working environment more comfortable and makes them more effective. So having a very intentional remote strategy and HR policy as well. I would say as well, being very, very strategic with your team on asynchronous work, setting that expectation that just because you send an email at 9 o'clock doesn't mean that you expect a response at 9:15 at night. It's I've seen people build it into their email signatures for internal communication, just to kind of set that expectation, because everybody wants to work hard. Everyone wants to appear to work hard. So yeah, just be intentional and kind of communicate well with the team to actually just set that asynchronous working model. And then the other thing is just make sure that well-being is at the forefront of your mind. Asking staff how they are, making sure that you get people together regularly to be open and transparent and talk about things that aren't work related, because that is what generates culture in any environment, work from home, work from the office, or hybrid.
Thank you. Well, that kind of leads quite nicely onto this question that I've had in, which is about sort of boundary setting. We're still hearing, and we've spoken about this, and seeing a lot of overworking when working from home. At what point does it become the responsibility of the individual to set their own boundaries, and any tips on communicating that?
I think it's just, I think there's a saying, you have to say something 10 times before it's fully understood. So I would just continually reiterate, there is not an expectation for you to work. I think it's quite easy to monitor how much work is being produced. It's also easy to monitor how much time someone's operating as well. So I would say do 2 things. You reinforce the need for time, having proper lunch breaks, because that's the other thing. It's not just working longer, it's taking shorter lunch breaks, because it's more convenient. You go down, make a sandwich, and you're back at work in 10 minutes time. So but there are, I mean, there's proven cases for working shorter and having bigger breaks being more productive. Just because you work solidly through doesn't mean the output's going to increase. So reinforcing that with your team is important. And also there are ways to track how long people are working, and I think a lot of these tracking companies are popping up now because there's an expectation, but I think they're slightly wrong in their strategy. Is they're looking at it as I'm going to use this software to make sure my team are working really hard. That's not what they should be using it for. It should track who's working too much, because they'll burn out. Your staff members will become frustrated. They'll tire. They'll just not work effectively. So I'd say if you're going to use tracking software, you use it to make sure that its number one primary objective is to make sure that your team aren't burning out, not to use it to spy or make them work harder or longer hours.
I love that. It's always about the lens that we are looking at these things through. Yeah. Okay, so we are very much at the end, Adam, of this talk. It has whizzed by. And we always end our podcast by asking our guests how they walk the talk when it comes to kind of managing their own well-being. So what are your 3 well-being non-negotiables, we like to call them? So 3 ways that you kind of prioritize and optimize your well-being.
So I mentioned one of them earlier, actually, is leaving my phone. Obviously, your business is on your phone. So leaving that behind, leaving it downstairs, and having that separation of work and sleep. Sleep's very important for me, at least. I think it's important for most people. The other one is kind of making sure that taking regular breaks and getting some fresh air every day. I mean, I was probably the worst remote worker for a number of years, where I was that person that would just work solidly through, occasionally wouldn't go outside for 4 days. That's a bad place to be. So making sure that you set time to get out, get some fresh air and walk. And one of them now is actually yours, which I stole. Is kind of replacing that commute to work.
Dance-a-thon. All right,
no, I can't dance. And yeah, that probably won't ever happen. But no, they replacing the commute, just going for a short walk and kind of having that stop-start, that kind of bookend to the day. I think is something that I've started doing more and more. But yeah, that's kind of, those are my 3. And there is a 4th, but I try not to work on weekends. I try to have a solid day, a whole day, where, unless I have to. I mean, the events industry is kind of a little bit different in that regard. But where I can, I don't work weekends.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today. It really has been a pleasure on a personal level, but also from a point of view. So yeah, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.